Hi, my name is Terry Bisson. I teach mathematics here at Canisius, but I also I sort of coordinate a Latin America Solidarity Committee for the Western New York Peace Center. But there are many groups working on peace and even on issues that affect Latin America and in solidarity in this hemisphere. So we have some rotating slides, 2 things from Canisius, 1 thing from the Peace Center, and then one event this Friday, this Friday, which is for Justice for Migrant Families. They're having a music event downtown at Fitz Books. So if you keep watching the screen, you'll see it sooner or later. But they'll have a taco dinner too. Okay, so from the point of view of the Latin America Solidarity Committee, LASC, we've been having these monthly coffee houses for many years, and we try to rotate through firsthand, people who can tell us firsthand what is happening in any part of Latin America, or indigenous issues sometimes throughout the Western Hemisphere. So we have them the 4th Monday of the month, and it's not supposed to snow, but we couldn't get that to stop. And then for March, we'll be working with the Western New York Women's March, which is the day before the 4th Monday of the month. So instead of having a coffee house then, we're just trying to get a lot of action going for the Women's March, which this will be about the 5th or 6th year of the Women's March. And it's a very big event with people from all over Western New York. And we're hoping to have some sign-making activities the Monday before the Women's March. And we'd like to feature particularly any women's issues or any environmental issues, but particularly tribute to the women of Latin America who have sacrificed a lot for these issues and accomplished great things. Almost anything good that happens in Latin America happens because of women, I would say. That's my feeling. Okay, so I'm supposed to ask Spencer to come up and introduce some of the activities that Campus Ministry is running. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. My name is Spencer Lichty. I'm the Director of Campus Ministry here at Canisius. Just want to take 30 seconds of your time before we get started to talk about a couple campus ministry activities that we're sponsoring that you can get involved with that are related to what we're going to be hearing about tonight. So Campus Ministry sponsors several service learning immersion programs throughout the year. So we do them over winter break, spring break, summer break. And this summer, we're actually going to be going down to Kino, to the Kino Border Initiative for a week to be immersed in everything that they have going on down there. You know, these trips are not about going down there to just do service or fix or help, but really be immersed into the issue, to learn about it, to be educated, to accompany, and to complicate, as Kino likes to put it. So if you're interested in a week-long experience down at the U.S.-Mexico border at Kino, the flyer is running through here on the slides. There's also a flyer up on the table. If you scan the QR code, you can fill out the form. The application deadline is Wednesday, so if you are interested, do it soon, and then I'll reach out with some more details. So if you do have any more questions, I'll be here tonight and happy to talk to anyone afterwards as well. Thanks. I'll turn it over to Richard.
So really quickly, in addition to the Campus Ministry Immersion summer program, there is the hybrid study abroad internship service learning program that our 3 young women are going to talk about today. That is credit bearing if you are interested, and you have to go for a month, or if you want 6 credits, you can go for 2 months. They can tell you how much fun that would be. And then, however, for that, you do need to have intermediate level Spanish. So if you are interested or know people who are interested, they should talk to me. And my email is also circulating through here. The other thing is that for Borders and Migrations Initiative this semester, we still have 2 more events. We have one March 8th at noon, and the last one is March 22nd at noon. There's not a flyer circulating for that, but it will be circulated through various social media platforms, and will also be on the Borders Migrations Initiative webpage, which, how do I find that? You type into Google, Canisius, Borders, and it's the very first thing that shows up. We also, from there, you can access our YouTube channel where we have all prior talks for both Borders and Migrations Initiative, as well as for all the other talks that we have done through the Spanish Department and or for honors through there. And they're bilingual by the, I would say, maybe 70% in English and 30% in Spanish for those of you that are interested. On that note, I think I will turn it over to Emma Marzak, Emma Radel, and Juliana Falsone, who were our very first students to go on this hybrid experience to Kino. And I'm going to let them share their experience, and hopefully it make you excited to do that as well. And I think we need to switch the PowerPoints, but I don't know who's doing that. Is Tyler doing that? Maybe Tyler's doing that. So, oh, you know how to do it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay. Escape. You said to go here. Hi. Thank you so much for braving the Buffalo weather to come and hang out with us tonight. So first we're just going to do a little bit of introductions for ourselves, then we're going to talk about the Kino, and then we're going to shift over into talking about what our experience was, what kind of things we took away, and just kind of information that you might want to know that maybe you can't learn just from talking about it in general. So first of all, I'm Emma Radel. I'm a junior at Canisius. I'm a double creative writing and psychology major. I also have a minor in English.
Hi everyone, my name is Juliana. I'm a double major in political science and international relations with a minor in Spanish here at Canisius.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Marzak. I am a psychology and Spanish dual major here at Canisius.
Don't be afraid of the microphone, because it helps us.
Okay, to start, this is just a brief background about Kino and their mission. They've always had a clear mission of promoting humane, just, and workable migration through various manners. First, they have direct humanitarian assistance of migrants at the shelter, and Kino is also a resource for these migrants after they are done residing at the shelter. And Kino uses education and social media as a large part of their mission to have people and communities together in support of a just system of migration, in addition to policy advocacy in Mexico and the United States through vigilas and large charlas that they host at the shelter itself.
So Kino's mission essentially encompasses every single person that is involved at Kino Border Initiative, which involves the volunteers, the migrants, the Florence Project, many different people. The Kino mission is essentially connected to both Jesuit values and educating the public on current U.S. immigration issues and legal issues. Kino is also, its main goal is to essentially humanize the migration experience and immigration as a whole, and also educate the public on how complex our immigration system actually is and how it actually reaches all over Latin America and the US. Through education, like Juliana said, Kino works with the Florence Project, an organization that works to spread awareness on the current legal status of the US immigration system through charlas, which are large chats that reach to migrants in the shelter. Obviously, us here are a part of the humanitarian aid aspect of Kino's mission. And then obviously Kino also does research and advocacy, as well as abuse documentation. And this is taken through migrants that come into the shelter. Essentially, we do encuestas, which are interviews where we can document migrants' abuse from Border Patrol or other experiences. And we can also hear testimonials too, which are essentially testimonies of migrants' journeys, which work to help humanize the migration experience. And these can all be found on Kino's website, on their social media. You can educate yourself in a way. And then immersion experiences, there's a slide on that later, but obviously it's for people like us to immerse ourselves to truly understand the full immigration experience.
So Kino looks very different than it did at the start in 2008. Since then, it has united over 6 Catholic organizations, and it began as a small comedor across the street from the new facility, which had room for about 90 people to eat twice a day. At the beginning, the organization started by Madre Gracia and a few other people who would serve out of vans at the border as a way to help people who were deported or recently released from detention facilities in the United States and then crossed and had no further assistance besides the small comedor. And then in the present, Kino focuses largely on presentations, immersion experiences, and advocacy speeches, like we've mentioned. And volunteers from across the globe have worked alongside of us. When we lived there, there was people from Colombia, Lithuania, here in New York City, DC, and a few other places that all came together to kind of make this possible. And the Florence Project, which is a legal assistance group, it started as 1 lawyer and now has grown to over 3 with legal assistants as well that do like pro bono work for Kino and kind of have their own little sector. And oftentimes when people come, they talk to like mental health counselors and things like that, and if they want to further their asylum process, they can have the resources of Florence Project free of charge to guide them in the right direction and kind of push towards making a more fluid process for migration.
So you may be wondering, where/who is the Kino Border Initiative? So Nogales, Sonora is part in Arizona and then part in Mexico, but the side that's on Mexico is much, much larger. It's about an hour and a half from Tucson if you drive, and then you cross the border and you're right in it. It's a Jesuit-run aid shelter, so there are a couple like long-term Jesuits that live there. There are a couple Jesuits who are in school that are working there, and then it's also run, as Juliana mentioned, by a group of sisters. It's a nunhood, a sisterhood, including Madre and Gracia. Who comes? Migrants, asylum seekers, and recent deportees, some of whom have just recently been intercepted while trying to illegally cross the border, and others who have lived in the United States for 20, 25, 30 years, and then were caught by Border Patrol and deported out of the United States. And then we're kind of going to go into some of the responsibilities as a volunteer and ways that we got to include ourselves in the process. So where do migrants come from? A lot of them come from states all over Mexico, including Guerrero and Chiapas, especially Guerrero, and typically it has to do with like gang violence or particular family conflicts that arise. But they also come from other Latin American countries. While I was there, I feel like the most migrants that I came in contact with were from Honduras or Guatemala, but there were also some from Venezuela and a couple from Haiti who would come over on boats with the expectation of kind of crossing via land through Latin America into the United States. So definitely all across Latin America as a whole. I wanted you to imagine the typical migrant story. I know that we have a lot of them in the media. You know, who are the kinds of people who are being deported? Who are the kinds of people that are being intercepted at the border? You know, they're like these hardened drug criminals. They're mostly male. And they like don't speak English and they don't want to do anything except bring drugs across the border. And then I wanted to take that and just throw it away. Especially at Kino, it's the majority of them are families and women with their children. These are victims of war, domestic, or gang violence. I'll share a couple of the personal testimonies later, but they come from pretty gruesome backgrounds and definitely just not the kind of media story that's portrayed to you. These are families who have already lost friends, family members, including trying to cross the border, and they're continuing to try to do it and continuing to try and seek asylum in the United States because this is literally their last hope. And their intent is to apply for asylum. So that's a specific process in the United States. You don't quite become a citizen of the United States, but you're provided a certain level of like safety and protection from the United States.
Back to the border immersion opportunities. Obviously, Spencer mentioned the upcoming border immersion trip, but essentially the goal of these border immersion opportunities is so we can actually understand these potential migrant stories that Emma was just talking about. Obviously, people who go through border immersion opportunities are able to work with volunteers to serve food in the Commodore and also walk through the Sonoran Desert, be exposed to different things that you might come across that might give us indications of what a migrant's journey might be like. And essentially it's just giving us insight into both perspectives on the border. For instance, you'll hear from ranchers that live along the border that may want a wall there, or you may come across different migrant testimonies or testimonials where migrants will give their personal experiences and journeys so you can learn from them and you can spread awareness and educate the public on your own immersion experience.
Canisius and Kino. If you know anything about Canisius, you know that it's very rarely said in a sentence and then not immediately followed with Jesuit values, cura personalis, that kind of idea. So basically, why would we from Buffalo, New York be heading all the way across the country and then into Mexico to try and participate in this? It's because of Jesuit values. So when you talk about things like cura personalis and people for and with others, definitely our volunteer experience is something that's sought to make that into a reality for us. Cura personalis is like Latin jumbo that just means care for the whole person. So when you talk about migrant stories, you find that they're often reduced down to just a single story, just their situation, and they don't really get a lot of complexity. But when it comes to cura personalis, especially the work that Kino tries to do, we're talking about serving these migrants in a way that rehumanizes them and allows a lot of different facets to come to light and kind of encourages the personalization of these people. So Jesuit mission, obviously central to Kino, central to Canisius, so that was a pretty easy switch over, which was nice. A question that I've been thinking about a lot while preparing for this is how much you can learn in a classroom. If you see on your left, you'll see a picture of me that Richard does not know that I took when we were doing a meeting while I was in Mexico. He does a series of Zooms where you do this little like migrant simulation experience where basically it's just you go into dead ends at every corner, and the idea is by the end you're like, wow, this is a really hard experience. Like, my card says that I'm a single mother of 3 and I need to get asylum, and you just told me that I can't come because I don't have any workable skills. And basically that is the idea. Like, that is the reality. But how much can you really learn in the classroom? I don't know. I know that I definitely took cura personalis, I took that kind of stuff more so as like a cute little slogan and a fancy little sticker, and it's something that definitely kind of hits you in the face when you actually show up in Mexico. So the immigration simulations and then also the cultural exchanges over Zoom. When I was a freshman and sophomore, when we were in our Spanish classes, we would Zoom with people from, do you remember where they were from? Yeah, but where in Mexico? Guadalajara. So these were kind of like well-to-do. This is like a Jesuit school that was in Mexico. It was in a totally different part of Mexico. And we were kind of just like talk back and forth in Spanish. Sometimes we would talk in Spanish. They would talk back in English. It was more so just an idea of like language exposure or like language exchange. So definitely a completely different experience. Very helpful. We would not have been able to do this if we did not have any Spanish skills whatsoever. But can you really learn about the plight of these migrants while you're sitting in a classroom? Not really.
Another question, how do migrants and asylum seekers get help at Kino? There is a lot of different resources that Kino provides to help these migrants. First, there's COVID-19 testing, which was a routine that was mandatory for every migrant to receive before they entered Kino, just to make sure everything was safe. We were in a fully masked facility as well, so every day we would wear masks the entire time while working, which was quite interesting in 105-degree weather. But Yeah, so also entrevistas, which were entry interviews. I didn't have the privilege of doing this because you have to be very, very good at Spanish to understand native speakers and kind of be able to document and listen at the same time their experiences and traumatic things that I probably wouldn't be able to fully comprehend and be able to document accurately. But I know a lot of people from Colombia and other places that had more experience, like with native speakers, did a great job at that. There was Roperia, which is a closed distribution portion of Kino that was upstairs in the facility. It was a huge closet that was full of donations. There was the comedor, which was the kitchen, which provided both people inside and outside of the shelter with 2 or 3 meals a day, depending if you were inside or if you were just Nogales local. Education, we had classes Monday through Friday for children. There was long-term shelter residents, which were given extended periods of stay rather than just like the normal 2-week period that people were provided with, and legal assistance through the Florence Project and further research and advocacy through social media and other platforms that Kino has.
So we're just going to quickly go through these different resources and talk about how we as volunteers went through participating in these. So first, as Juliana mentioned, this was a fully masked facility. These people are coming from totally different countries, totally different routes to get there. It was very important to keep people safe and healthy while we were there. So the first thing that people did when they came in is they came and sat down underneath this little tent, this little tarp, and we would give them a COVID test. I witnessed a lot of grown men trying really, really hard not to let the tears fall down, because you know when it like gets up in your nose, it's pretty uncomfortable. So migrants seeking the longer term resources, such as to stay for 2 weeks or longer than 2 weeks, they would receive that and it would be written down on their little card. I had a lot of really interesting in-between conversations with people while they were sitting there in the 15-minute interim while we were waiting for their COVID test to come back. There were a lot of, where did you learn Spanish? And where are you from? And you're from New York? What's the city like? No, I'm near Niagara Falls. What's Niagara Falls? So it was a whole conversation. But like I mentioned earlier, there was a gentleman who had come with his son. He had told me that he had been living in the United States for 30 years. He had another son on the opposite side of the border who was, his mother was from Texas, so he was currently living in Texas, and the father had just recently been deported. He had been doing like a half custody sort of thing, and he could no longer do that because he had been deported. He had been working in the United States, living in the United States as long as he could remember, because he had moved there with his parents through the desert when he was very young. So he was expressing a lot of obviously discomfort and fear being in a community that was supposedly his, but not really. And then entrevistas or encuestas, entrevista in Spanish just means interview. When migrants came in after they got their negative COVID test, after they ate and sat down, they would sit down with traditionally a lawyer or a native Spanish speaker or somebody who was just pretty advanced. Our friend Spencer, while we were there, he knew French, German, Spanish, and English. So when some of the Haitians would come in, Spencer would sit down and translate their French into Spanish so that it could be written down by the lawyer. So that was really interesting. But if you were listening to Spencer earlier, which I hope you were, he mentioned the words complicate and accompany. So this was a really important part of Kino, to sit down and listen to people's stories, because again, as we talk about, they've kind of been reduced to a single story. There's a lot of assumptions going in about what these people are doing, what they're trying to accomplish, what kind of family background they have. So these kind of interviews were a means of listening to people's stories and actually giving them like a listening ear. Sometimes they would explain to us that this was the first time anybody had sat down and asked them what they had gone through. And then that also offered Kino the opportunity to identify special cases and then also connect people to further resources.
So Roperia was just a closed distribution service, which I said, that provides migrants with adequate clothing, hygiene products, and essential supplies. When migrants come, oftentimes they have all their belongings taken by CBP or just Border Patrol agents, and if they're lucky enough, they can receive their belongings back after they cross in a plastic bag, which is just like completely dehumanizing, and it oftentimes just kind of humiliated people and like dehumanized the whole experience of, you know, going back to Mexico itself. So our job as Roperia, it could arguably be like the most strenuous activity there, because it would be very difficult to like first understand like the difference between sizing in the United States and sizing in Mexico, and understanding just like the language barrier itself. And kind of just bonding with the families in a way that just made them feel like it's okay that they don't have like, I don't know, like I feel like a lot of people there were kind of like embarrassed of their situation and were like scared to ask for help, but you have to like kind of just ensure them that it's okay and that we have the resources and that things like are going to be okay. And education classes, they were in Spanish, English, and math. Me and Emma had the privilege of working together a few mornings and kind of just create a sense of community and consistency for the children. A lot of these kids didn't have the ability to read or write because they just lacked like adequate like education in their home countries, and a lot of them had journeys of migration that were like months or weeks long, so they had a lot of, you know, I guess like desire to learn. And the intention behind these classes were just to have students learn basic skills and gain teamwork experience by interacting with their peers. I can remember mornings where we'd come into work and the kids would just run up to us and be like, what are we gonna learn today? What are we gonna learn today? And we'd just like have to just be like numbers and letters and just basic things that would just, you know, have everyone talk and bond together. And it was super cool that like we could assign homework when in reality it was just like behind the wall where they sleep, these kids would go back and just color or paint or do fun things. And then the next morning we would arrive and they would show them to us and be so proud of themselves. So it was a cool experience, just kind of like play teacher for a minute and just get to hear about like the experiences of different countries. First of all, like each child came from different backgrounds, so hearing about their education back home and like their goals for their future was pretty inspiring.
Finally, we have the Commodore, which is essentially the whole shelter in itself and one of the most integral parts of Kino because it extends to not only migrant populations, but local populations in need as well. For instance, we would do like food prep in the kitchen as volunteers, and then we'd also serve meals and water, and essentially through the Commodore, we're able to directly support people through just providing basic needs, basic food and water. And the Commodore could also encompass working in the shelter in general. For instance, we had shelter shifts as well. So throughout the week, there'd be one day where we'd have a 12-hour day and we'd be able to just essentially help out around the shelter and accompany and hang out with the people living in the facility. In addition, we have legal assistance and advisement. Obviously, we discussed the Florence Project and its involvement in Kino. And when migrants come to the shelter after their encuestas, they are provided either the opportunity to talk with a social worker that's available or with US or Mexican lawyers, depending on their situation and their needs. Then we also have research and advocacy, which I also discussed. And a lot of this abuse documentation and migrant testimonials go into further outreach and awareness with Kino, but they also go into different resources like The Voices of the Border, which is a novel that will be discussed later. And yeah.
So we're going to talk for a minute on our first impressions, the kind of things that maybe we expected going into our experience. Obviously, the first thing that you see when you're on your way from the United States side going into the Mexico side is the border wall. I had never seen the border wall even depicted in pictures, just kind of conceptually. So it was definitely interesting to see like the barbed wire that was on top. Believe it or not, the side that you're seeing is majority seen from the United States side, and that's like the fancier looking side of it. The other side was not so picture perfect. If you see in the bottom middle, they actually have a series of murals on the Mexico side of the border of people who have been killed in unjust ways, either by trying to cross or just being misinterpreted what they were doing when they were just walking on the sidewalk. So unfortunately, when you were walking around, I want to say that the one in the bottom middle, that young gentleman had died just in like 2020 or 2019, but there were others that were dating back to like 2005, 2010. They were running out of space for trying to document all these people and remember them.
Yeah, I was the first person of the group to arrive at Kino. I came a week early, which was quite the experience. I remember I got picked up by Eileen, our coordinator, and I had never realized the difference between crossing a single border. It was two different worlds. You just don't see as many fast food chains. You don't see development how you do on the United States side. So my first impression, the first like impactful experience that I had was within 10 minutes of crossing the border, she decided to show me the border wall in its entirety, and we drove by it. And one of the first things that I saw that made me immediately start crying was I saw children and families holding hands through the wall. And it just like struck me that these people are in such situations that are so unfair. I don't want to get emotional, but like it is emotional, like seeing it in real life. And yeah, it was a lot. I remember calling my mom and I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this for a month. Like I just drove by the wall. I have to see these people and talk to them every day. So yeah, the first impression when you cross the border, it's just like a whole different world and you kind of just don't expect it to be as impactful, but it was super life-changing seeing that.
I think one of the first things that I noticed driving into Mexico was how extensive the border wall was, seeing it cross the mountains, and also thinking about the fact that this is called Dos Nogales, and both of these cities are called by the same name, yet they're separated by this humongous wall. And another thing that I noticed was the difference between the wall on both sides. I remember the Mexican side obviously had tons of art and like hand painting on the mirror, on the wall and stuff like that. And the US side had a lot of barbed wire and things like that. So I feel like it can somewhat symbolically and literally represent different ideas from both sides of the border. So
I will also mention before we move on to the next slide that the difference in like police presence on the American side versus Nogales on the Mexican side was like completely astounding. I remember before we crossed over, we were hanging out on the United States side and like every other car was a police car, and some of them were just, you know, Tucson police, some of them are Arizona police, and then a lot of them were like CBP and the border patrol. And then we got over into the Mexico side and you literally just drove over. There was nobody to stop you. There was nothing. And getting back into the United States after was not as simple of a process at all. But I remember specifically being like, there are a lot of cops here, and then you cross over and it was just like cop ghost town.
wait, one more thing. I remember one of the volunteers, Camilla, from Lithuania, was wearing a shirt that said "Nadie es ilegal," so no one is illegal. And she was wearing that while she was crossing, and she did get stopped, I'm pretty sure, right?
Well, crossing into the United States.
Yeah, crossing into the United States, even though she was like, oh, I'm a volunteer, blah, blah, blah. But, so yeah, that shows some different attitudes on the migration experience.
So the reality of the border as we were there is a little bit different than it is now, but we thought that we would talk a little bit about what it kind of looked like, kind of the political situation and cultural situation while we were there. So I don't know how many of you know about Title 42. It might be something that Juliana is going to talk about a little bit more, but it's basically a 20th century provision in the United States that was developed because of, it was like dysentery or cholera? It was cholera, okay. That basically said that the United States was allowed to more strictly limit migration and asylum seekers because of the, you know, chance that they could be bringing over cholera. So if you can imagine that under the Trump administration, when COVID started, those were reenacted, Title 42 was reenacted, and that drastically cut down how many people were able to cross over. So when migrants would come up, we often had to be the first people to break the news to them while they were sitting like in the COVID testing or during their encuesta, and they were talking about, well, I heard from a friend of a friend that this is how I can get into the United States, and we had to tell them, oh, you know, it's actually really recently changed and that's not going to be a possibility. I think while we were there, they were crossing something like 11 families every single day, which is like absolutely pitiful depending on like the hundreds of people that we would serve. So that was always really tough to try and explain to people what Title 42 was, and kind of have to like be the first person while you're sitting there in the 15 minutes waiting for their COVID test to be like, yeah, you don't really have anywhere to go after this. You're not making it over to the United States. unless it was a special circumstance. And then while we were there, we also did a Vigilia Titulo, or Contra Titulo 42. So that was a series of, I don't know if you can see, there's the Padre, the father, that's standing right in the middle, but basically he hosted this vigil, and it was a whole group of people from all over Mexico. There were a lot of people involved at Kino who we took like a drive there with, but it was also people just all over Mexico. And basically we prayed and talked together, and I think it was also recorded and live streamed, and basically the idea behind it was to share personal testimonies and to talk about Title 42 and like just how limiting it was. I mean, one of the things that I would say is that when I crossed over into the United States at the end of my Kino experience, I was actively battling the flu. So as you can believe it, I was like stuffy and coughing and sniffling, and all I had to do was show the Border Patrol my cute little birth certificate, and she let me over. Meanwhile, all of these migrants, while we were giving them the COVID test, they were like, oh, actually, like I've received my vaccines, I'm taking the COVID test, and none of that was sufficient to let them cross the border because of the possibility that they could potentially be bringing COVID over, which was really silly because all these people were like, oh, no, like I'm vaccinated, like I got this vaccine, I got it this many times, I'm willing to get like another shot if you need me to. But it was just that idea that there was a wall that said like, you were not allowed to come across, but that didn't apply to me, obviously, because of the color of my skin. So that was really frustrating to like know that I was literally like coughing and nobody asked me, oh, have you tested positive for COVID? And there was no information that they asked in terms of that. But for these migrants, that was like a really hard wall that unfortunately still is existing in a certain manner. And I just wanted to translate that little bumper sticker for you. It says, La dignidad no tiene fronteras, which means dignity doesn't have borders. So clearly it does down at the Mexican side, at least where we were. But that was kind of what they were talking about, is to end Title 42, and they had a series of migrants that were inscribing their names on it.
Yeah, I would also like to add that we were there for a month, and no one tested positive. There was not one single encounter where I did a COVID test and someone was positive. So that was just quite ironic that it's still Title 42 still remains in effect, although even in May and June when we were there, no one was testing positive. But recently there's been some unfortunate announcements by the Biden administration. Sorry, I have like a few notes, so it's pretty accurate. Basically, Biden is proposing an act that would make any legal crossing, it would prevent them from future asylum seeking. So basically, if anyone crosses the border illegally and gets caught, it ruins their chances of ever seeking asylum in the future, which I found this quote online, which kind of accurately sums it up. It says, requiring persecuted people to first seek protection in countries with no functioning asylum systems themselves is ludicrous and life-threatening. So in that manner, Biden's kind of making people, if they're crossing from a country in Latin or Central America, they need to first seek asylum in Mexico, which is non-functioning and nearly impossible, because if it was possible, people would be doing that and people would be living in border towns and having jobs and being successful, but that's just not possible. And these administration announcements are just like disheartening and kind of moving backwards and mirroring the Trump administration, which Biden promised that we were going to get rid of that and move forward, but we're 6 months out of this experience and nothing has changed. It's just gotten worse. So this is just a picture of, we would really see this kind of thing. Like people are really with families, 8, 9, 10 people sitting outside of the shelter every day waiting for food, and there would be just, like Emma said, nothing we could do. We would literally have to tell them like Title 42 exists and we can't do anything about it. We can offer you 2 weeks worth of stay. We can try to help you get a job. We can try to help you find a house, but not even a house. People would really be renting rooms, and there would be 8, 9 people in the house or in the room. So it's just an unfortunate situation, and the current reality is not looking any better.
Yeah. You often met with the asylum seekers on the Mexican side of the border, you were saying?
Yeah, our shelter was actually on the Mexican side of the border, so majority of our time, well, I think all of our time was there. I only crossed one time to the United States to visit the Jesuits for like a party, just like celebrate. I think it was like an anniversary of someone's service. But yeah, so we lived on the Mexican side. We stayed at a volunteer house, and it was pretty close to the shelter. So anybody who was waiting to seek asylum would come to Kino as like either their first resort coming back into Mexico or their last resort going into the United States. So it was right on the border.
And the really big open building that you were having those events in, that was really on the Mexican side.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the new facility. Keno got, I think, funded or a grant to build that in 2020, and that's where I think it holds 140 migrants that can sleep there. And then those events that you saw with like the 100 people in the shelter, those aren't necessarily the people that live there. Those are just people in the community that are also looking to seek asylum that just want information. So the Florence Project would run weekly or like bi-weekly events to just kind of inform the public about the current situation, the status of Title 42, and just like the possibilities that they have with seeking asylum or refuge in the United States.
She mentioned the volunteer house. It was called Casa Paloma. Paloma means pigeon, so it existed a while before we got there, so I don't know what like the background of the story is. This was funded by Keno. It was on the Mexican side of the border, and it was like a 3-minute drive in the world's most clunky and like least dependable piece of garbage car, like that you could ever imagine. We didn't even lock it half the time because like nobody was gonna steal it. But we did do our laundry at Keno. I don't know if that's like really important to note. But essentially, we had a group of us in the bottom. In the middle, we had gone to our friend Angel's soccer game. It was like one of the first nights that we were all there together. And then in the top right corner was actually taken at the American side of like, they accept a lot of different donations, and they're first funneled through the American side and then brought over into the Mexican side, because there are a series of churches on the Arizona side that collect donations. So then that was Spencer trying on the fancy cowboy boots because he thought it was funny. But that was like the first resort. If you can see like all just the boxes and the shoes, and then there were bins, and that would be how we would sort it and then bring it over to the Mexican side of the border. Now we're going to talk about our personal impact, which is where I may start crying, but if I do, you can just pretend that you don't see it. So we thought that it would be important to talk about what we actually got out of this experience. Obviously, we all did very similar things, but we didn't get all the exact same things out of it. So we're also going to mention our like main takeaway, the most rewarding part of the experience, and then the most difficult part of the experience. So I was there from May 17th until like June 20th or June 21st. In the top left, you can see my trek through Arivaca, which is basically where one of the Jesuits, Jesuit, would take us through on a walk. They'll be doing that for the border immersion trip. He would take us on a walk through the desert, and obviously he was telling us you can't really simulate the experience of what it's like to be a migrant trekking through this desert in the middle of the night. You haven't eaten in 3 days. You're covered in camouflage. You're terrified of like what's going to happen. But he did take us on a walk so that we could kind of see what the terrain looks like. At one point we were standing up on the top of a hill, and Jarrett let us know that on both sides of the border there were 100% more than one sniper like focused on us. He said that there would be one from the Border Patrol on the American side, and then there would also be some from the Mexican side, particularly of the drug cartel. So while we're standing in this massive open area, Jared's like, yeah, there's definitely at least like 3 snipers pointed at us right now. He also informed us of something called the, it's not the internet, was it called the electric border wall?
Something like that.
Yeah, like the electric border wall. Basically, the border wall doesn't just consist of that physical wall. They also have, sprinkled throughout the desert, a series of motion detectors and microphones. They have these like huge towers. They use those little like mini drones that like fly around and try to detect people. So he said basically if we so much as like sneezed or like stepped on a branch, that it was going to be picked up by the American side. I want to say he told us that it continues for either 15 or 25 miles past the border. So there are tons of people who will like finally make it through the desert, and then the second that they hit the main roads, if they don't hit I think there were like 4 stops in between like Tucson and where we were in Nogales, where they like would stop us and check, and they had a series of they had dogs to like sniff out if there was anything there. And then one of the things that made me the most upset, and I don't know why this made me so upset, but they have these like mirrors that they have on really long sticks, and they just point the mirror underneath your vehicle just in case there's any like, you know, Mexican migrants that are like secretly hiding underneath it. I think for me, like, it was just so frustrating to see that like they wouldn't even be willing to like lean over and check, that it was just something that they were just sitting there. A lot of the border stops we were just waved on because there were a bunch of white people in the car, so they didn't really care. I will say that the most rewarding part of the program was getting to interact with the children. Believe it or not, lots and lots and lots of little kids there. They were very sweet. They were always really patient with us and always teaching us new words. So if you can see right in the middle, somebody kept calling us trillizos, and we were like, we don't know what that means. So somebody was explaining to us that it means like, oh, you know, like a sister, but there's three of you, but there's three of you at the same time. And I was like, oh, a triplet. So we actually wrote it out, the parents, we wrote it out together. So the top is my handwriting, and then beneath it was one of the dads who was trying to explain to me what trillizos means. So they were very patient with kind of like the language barrier that would go on. They were always willing to explain it to us in like another way or using another word. And that was the same thing with the little kids. They would sometimes talk very quickly, which could be like really confusing, but they were always really energetic. One of the little kids, we were doing this game once where I would write like El Coche, which means the car, and then they would draw, because it was like a reading practice, they would draw a little car. And then I did El Plátano, and they would draw a little banana. And then I left her alone for like 2 minutes, and I come back, and she had drawn my like a little person that was me, so that was really cute. I would say that the most difficult part was, there's definitely, I knew going into it that there was going to be a sense of humility and also embarrassment. I mean, you can tell walking through the shelter that you have a different skin color than everybody else, and they kind of know that you get to choose to be there and choose to be in the situation that you are, and meanwhile they don't have any choice over at all. So I think it was definitely, like, it could be embarrassing at times, because they would tell me about their like really difficult experiences, and I was like, you have gone through so much more than I have, and I can walk across the border right now, and it might be years before you can get over there. The personal testimonies were obviously very emotionally, he would always hit you really hard. My friend JM in the bottom right corner there, he was the third of 3 boys, and his mother had officially, they were from Guerrero, and they had officially decided to try and cross for asylum because he had lost his first brother, and then his second brother went into hiding, and then they got news that his second brother had also been murdered. It was like a series of like money confusions and all this stuff, because down in Mexico, especially in the more like drug cartel focused areas, police are like not a thing, local government are not a thing, and it's really just run by a series of people who will tell you to give them money, and if you don't give them money for just like no reason whatsoever, then you start losing your family members. So my friend JM in the corner was the youngest of 3 kids, and his mom was trying to cross the border to get safety for him, because he was like her last one, so we would talk about his brothers. Up top in the middle, I'm holding a little, it was like an embroidered, it's not embroidered, I don't know what they call it, but it was a little wallet that JM's mom actually gave to me when they were leaving, because they had officially decided that they were going to go back to Guerrero because she had learned about Title 42, and she was like, well, I guess we really don't have a choice. So they were going to head back there, and she was going to try and I think connect with one of her friends who had like a business there. But when she was leaving, she told me that she was really grateful for the connection that I had made with her son, and so she gave me her little wallet, and you can't see it, but the side that's facing my face, it says Te amo, Ada. So it says like, I love you, Ada. So it's kind of like a little like I love you hug before we had to leave. I would say that was definitely the most difficult, was hearing those personal testimonies and also feeling like there wasn't a lot that I could do. My main takeaway, obviously it's a very Jesuit thing to say, but the people on the border have every reason to be mad with God, and you would not believe the faith of the migrants who are down there. I mean, they would tell these like absolutely harrowing stories of like how they lost all their siblings and their kids, and how they just gotten word about this horrible thing that had happened. They said, but I'm so thankful to God for taking me to Kino and for bringing me to these people who can take care of me. So that was like, it always blew my mind. I mean, we had masses, we celebrated every random saint's birthday that you possibly could. People would come up and the kids would be involved in like doing the readings, and the parents always wanted to try and give like one of the homilies. So that was just like absolutely like so humbling to be like, oh, you know, like we all have our own personal like religious stories and backgrounds, and the fact that these people had gone through what they had gone through, and at the end of the day that they were still faithful in a God that like who would help them through it, was just absolutely mind-blowing and definitely very humbling. So there was a Bible verse that I would sometimes read to myself in the morning: the sacrifice pleasing to God is a broken spirit. You will not despise a broken and humbled heart. So even on the days where I was like, I can't do this, I'm not helping them, it feels more embarrassing to walk around being a blue-eyed, blonde, white girl who could cross the border, when these people have gone through so much more and deserve my place in life so much more. So I just tried to remind myself that humility was also part of the process, and so was accompanying these migrants.
So I'm also going to talk about the hardest part, the most rewarding part, and my largest takeaway. For me, the hardest part was kind of understanding my privilege. Before I left, I was very focused on myself and my world and my life, and things that mattered so much here didn't matter at all as soon as I crossed the border. So it was like a sense of humility and just like a sense of realizing how different people live and how grateful you truly need to be to just have the privilege of living in the United States, period. I had to recognize that living away from home and the difficulties of being homesick were super temporary, and in 30 days I would be able to go home and see my mom and my siblings and all my friends and go back to life just as I knew it. But everybody else at the border or everybody else at the shelter might not go home and see their parents ever. So it was just kind of hard to deal with your personal struggles and just say to yourself, like you said, like we had the choice to go. They don't have the choice to be there. They don't have the choice to cross. We could go for a party at the Jesuit's house. We could go shopping in the United States side, go to McDonald's, do whatever we needed to do, but they didn't have the privilege of doing that. The most rewarding experience was definitely with the two girls on your left. Melanie and Alexa were such a big part of my experience at Kino. They were two sisters. The one on the left is 8, Melanie, and then the one on the right, Alexa. I think she was 6. Or her birthday was just happening over at Kino, so maybe 7. But we had a special bond. I would wear a fanny pack every day at Kino just to hold my phone and a few of my belongings while I was working. And that was one of the first words they learned in English was fanny pack. So every day they'd be like, fanny pack, and I'd be like, yeah. So one day, who found the fanny pack in Roperia?
It was me.
Yes,
Yeah.
so she found the fanny pack in Roperia, which is pictured. And I knew immediately I have to give it to Melanie because every morning she would say fanny pack. So I ended up giving it to her on her last day at Kino because she was leaving and I was just, have this to remember me. I gave them both bracelets, which they're wearing in that picture as well. And I was like, just as a memory, we can see each other again. It'll be okay. And then the next two or 3 days later, they came back as a local, not as a person who lived in the shelter with their parents. And they ended up giving me those 2 stuffed animals on the bottom. And they said, this is for you to remember us. And I still have them, and it makes me cry because but yeah, it was such a rewarding moment. And I was just I definitely impacted their life in the same way that they impacted mine. And we had a party for a kid at the shelter whose family was struggling a bit. And this was after we had exchanged both of our gifts. They showed up at the party, and I was unexpecting to see them. And they were wearing the fanny pack and the bracelets, and I was just wow, we both didn't even know we were gonna see each other. So that was just super rewarding to know that I had an impact on their life, and they definitely impacted mine. And my largest takeaway was probably learning that so many people care. I learned a lot on this trip, but I learned more about the people in the communities that dedicate their lives to the border more than anything. The Jesuits and the sisters were super inspiring. Being there for 1 month is emotionally draining and just super difficult to get through, but hearing that they've been there for 5, 10, and Madre Gracia's been there for 15 years, so I just can't imagine being that selfless and doing so much work for the people. That's actually a picture on the right. It's the attorney from the Florence Project, but the person laying across us was our intern coordinator, Kieran, and then the 2 Jesuits in the back, Kevin and Jarrett. And they actually built that gazebo, and it was just a cool experience to see how they live. They transform their entire life and dedicate every moment of every day to helping migrants succeed. So yeah, it was a large takeaway. And on the top, you can see some notes that Melanie and Alexa would write me. I'd come in to volunteer in the morning, it'd be 8 o'clock. I'd be oh, gotta go make food, gotta do this, getting my day ready. And then they would come up to us and be I love you so much, thank you for being here. And the notes would just say you're best friends with them, and they just are so grateful for you. We would paint nails at night during our shelter shifts just to give them a sense of being normal children and just enjoying. We had a few opportunities to outside of volunteering, just kind of enjoy being in Mexico for a bit. We actually toured a museum, which one of the artists at Kino, he recently got his art put in the museum, so it was a big accomplishment. We kind of just walked around and seen local artists and kind of got to understand, just I forget what the exhibit was. It was body art, but also it was body art, right?
It was arte desnuda.
Oh yeah,
so.
arte desnuda, so nude
Naked
art.
art,
Yeah, so we just kind of got to understand that and just hear how the artists at Kino kind of wanted to transform the exhibit in the future. So yeah, it was a really great experience.
Talking about the 2 paintings
Yeah, the whole museum was dedicated to nude art. So every painting was like that. Yeah, it was fabulous. I have so many pictures if you'd like to see. It was quite an interesting exhibit. But yeah.
All right, my personal impact. So I'd say the most difficult part of the experience was, it's kind of hard to encompass it, but in general, just say people, because of the relationships that I made with all these people, and the fact that they had to leave as well, because people could only stay in the shelter for a certain amount of time, only for like a few weeks, and they'd come and go. They'd either go back home to Guerrero, or they'd move across the border, which is an amazing thing, or they'd move into an apartment with other migrant families. But just the fact that I could have a limited impact on these people's journeys was so difficult, and the fact that I had to walk along beside them and I couldn't actually do too much for them, because the thing that's impacting them is so much bigger than all of us. It encompasses corruption, US immigration policies, and general humanity, things like that. But in general, it's kind of hard to figure out how to say it, but I just remember recognizing my place in the world. And I remember I was up in the Save the Children room where I was hanging out with all the kids, kind of like a little daycare. We were hanging out playing games. And I remember they kept climbing up to the window and looking at the border, because Kino is right on the border. And I remember them asking me, "Is that an airport?" And they didn't recognize how close they were to touching freedom. And that was definitely a difficult thing to recognize, and to not be able to help them achieve that. Like, just come with me, please, just come with me. Like, obviously all of these kids, I wish I could have taken them, but they went off on their own journeys. And then obviously, like, other people that I made connections with, because we did everything together with the migrants in the facility. We would prepare meals, we would do our laundry together in the same places, wash dishes. And I remember these two women that I would like interact with on the daily, and I'd be like, "Hey, how's it going?" and stuff like that. And I'd just sit in on their testimonies at one point, and just to hear their journeys and realize how much they've gone through. Like, people that you've been interacting with and making connections with is just so impactful. And it really makes you realize what your place is, not only at Kino, but in the world. One of the most rewarding things would have to be the awareness that I gained from this experience, and also recognizing my place in the world, because recognizing my privilege, like Juliana said, I would like to harness my education to contribute in a beneficial way. And yeah, exactly. I think just educating myself and actually being able to experience and fully learn what is actually happening at the border was super rewarding and impactful. And yeah. And then finally, I'd say that my largest takeaway was realizing the importance of connection and being able to communicate with other people. I realized the value of my Spanish education, and yep, there you go. I mean, after all of us studying Spanish for years, I realized, like, wow, if I came down here as a volunteer speaking English, I probably would have been like, what is going on? I mean, Camilla, she spoke Lithuanian and English, and she had a tough time, definitely. But being able to actually interact and communicate with people, either in COVID testing or even just sitting and eating in the shelter or reading with kids, I realized that I could connect with all of these people that were coming from all over Latin America. And I don't know, it was very insightful into the importance of language and the importance of education, but also even the importance of going down there and wanting to connect with people and learn. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just, my impression is that possibly when people make it as far as the border, and they realize the difficulty that they're going to face, that they would come to Kino first. Is that a lot of those people had just arrived at the border, do you think?
Yeah, so generally they would be told actually by locals. They would tell us, oh yeah, like I was wandering around, I had just found out that I can't go, and somebody told me to go to Kino. Like we said, it was actually the final building in Nogales before you went under the tunnel to like cross over into the United States. So generally like people would get there, they would be turned away, and then literally as they were walking back, they would discover Kino. And then I know that we've mentioned before, like people only got like a 2-week stay, and that sounds like really brutal, right? Like these people are going through so much. I want to say that while we were like on a day-to-day basis, when we gave out 2 meals to the general community, not people who were staying there was something like 150 people that we would come in contact with. Yeah, there were a lot of people, and the shelter slept, I think there were like 25 beds on the bottom floor and 25 beds on the top, or maybe 30 beds. So it was literally in order to serve as many people as possible and connect them into the resources, and then to set them on a different journey in the future. So I know that it sounds terrible to be like really sorry that your husband just got murdered and you need somewhere to go, but we're kicking you out. That's not really how it worked. Generally by the end of the 2 weeks they had made connections or come up with a new plan, and we were able to set them off in like a different journey.
Yeah, but I mean also you welcomed them, and imagine the children not knowing what would happen, and then suddenly someone welcomes them. So
yeah, it was really interesting too. I mean, the longer that we stayed there, the more that I saw like my family and like my friends in these kids. I mean, obviously these kids have gone through absolutely traumatic things. I remember one day I was trying to start a conversation with this little kid named Antonio, and I was like, oh, so do you have any siblings? And he was like, yeah, I had 3 older brothers. They all got murdered. So and I was like, you're 6. Like he was literally 6, and he was like, yeah, like I'm the last boy in my family. So I learned really quick to start conversations about things like what your favorite ice cream flavor was, and not about your family. But it was really interesting. I mean, these kids would run around. They would take these like really dilapidated soccer balls and just like kick the crap out of them. They used to they had this like, do you remember the little like car? You know those little cars that you have that have the little pulleys on them, and you use them for like 1-year-olds? They would have like 9-year-olds in it, and they would yank each other across the entire Commodore floor and then let go, and they would go flying into the wall. And then the dads would play like ball games with them and stuff like that. So definitely like you see the playfulness of children. And there was this little girl, Fernanda, who came up to me one day and said, I think she was 4, she said, my mom told me that I have to ask you to teach me how to read. So she pulled up a book. I don't remember what book it was. I think it honestly had to do with migration, but it was like a little kid's book. And she was like, I need you to teach me how to read. And I was like, okay, we're gonna start with your letters. Like I don't know how to teach anybody to read. But they were just little kids. They were really interested in learning. They love to draw. They love to talk about Among Us, which they called Among Us. And they like to talk about superheroes like Spider-Man, who they call Spider-Man. So they were just little kids with like interest. That was why it was my like favorite part. I felt like a lot of connection with the little kids. It's definitely easier to like talk with them, and they were very patient with us, luckily.
Yeah, and I feel like also it's important to mention just like the people outside of the shelter we would see like on a reoccurring basis every day, and it was kind of interesting because once you're there, every day just blends together. But it'd be like a Wednesday at 9 a.m. and kids here are at school and classes learning, but they're there with dirty containers and empty like water bottles asking for food, and you just think to yourself, shouldn't you be learning? Shouldn't you be in class? And instead they're holding hands with their 3-4-year-old sibling coming up to you being like uno, dos, tres, like for 1, 2, or 3 people. So it's just like that's kind of striking as well, because you see 2 or 3-year-olds in diapers with no shoes, like little tiny t-shirts on, coming up to you asking you for 1 serving, and then they'll come back for another, and you at one point you have to say we can't give you 3 or 4 servings. So it's just like that was very difficult too, and just realizing that, like comparing the situation in that sense, it was really hard to see every day.
How can you contribute? Oh,
Yes,
hi,
Richard.
Richard.
I just wondered if you could talk about how this experience and your education at Canisius is influencing what you're going to do in your future.
You wanna
Hey,
go first?
Juliana.
Well,
I'll go after.
I'm planning on going to law school in the fall, and this experience kind of motivated me to pursue a career in law and focus on immigration and just asylum help in general. So I'm just hoping in the future, I know I want to like have a concentration in cross-border migration if I go to UB. So I was looking into that program, and this kind of just like facilitated like a new sector of thought. And just like at first I was like, oh, I'll work in medicine or I'll do something in law, but then this kind of motivated me. I was like, I need to do this. Like, this is important. This isn't getting money for a contract or taxes or something. This is something that's important and it will impact people. And I feel like my education through Richard and Canisius itself, just with Spanish and political science, international relations, this all kind of ties into just, I don't know, a hopeful future in migration law. So that's how I plan on using this experience in my future. But
I'm going to echo something kind of similar to that. I will be willingly giving my money to UB to go to law school as well, because this experience really sparked my passion for obviously learning about not only the legal systems and like how intricate and complex they are and how they affect people, but I'd like to harness my education to help people specifically in the field of immigration. And yeah.
I'm not going to law school. Yeah, I'll pass on that, but like really proud of you guys. I am continuing my Spanish studies. I've continued to seek out volunteer opportunities while in Buffalo. And then for me, a really important part of this was like actually getting to use my Spanish skills in a useful environment where that actually allowed me to connect with people. So I've more recently started learning Arabic with the intent of connecting with like refugees around the Buffalo area, but we also count as like a safety area for Ukrainian refugees, so I might be learning Ukrainian one of these days, but definitely not gonna be a lawyer, sorry.
You'll just be trilingual.
Yeah.
How can you contribute? So, you can educate yourself either by pursuing border immersion opportunities or even going on the Kino website and looking at testimonials and what Kino's doing and learning about the U.S. immigration system and its impact. And as a result of this, you can advocate and spread awareness. You can go on social media and follow Kino Border Initiative on Instagram, or you can honestly just take your learning experience and do things like we're doing and present and spread awareness. Understanding different perspectives is also a part of this. You can also volunteer too by doing the Dos Nogales experience, an internship for credit or for pure pleasure.
Voices of the Border is a book written by Madre Gracia, she's like the head of the sisterhood in Nogales. She's volunteered at Kino for decades and used her experience doing entrevistas to create this book. The personal narratives of lived experiences are presented originally in Spanish and then translated into English in this book. And they bring us closer to the individual's strength, love, and courage that they use to face hardships and injustices. And also, if you do go on the immersion trip, you will have the experience. Madre Gracia reads portions of the book to immersion groups. I remember there was various colleges and universities that would come for a day or two just to tour the facility, but it was always expected that you would sit down in the conference room and listen and just understand the true realities, because sometimes when you see everybody, you don't know the story behind the face, and it's just like when you hear truthfully what's happening and how difficult not only their journey across the desert or through Central and South America was, but just like their experiences in their home lives, which are also provided in the Voices of the Border book. It definitely changes your perspective. The book is available for purchase on Amazon and also at the shelter, so you can purchase it like $20 or something. It's very cheap. So it's a really good experience, and I hope I can read this in the future too.
There's a copy in the Canisius library.
Oh yeah, look, yes. Oh, I didn't even know that, so the more you know.
And there's an interview that we did with her because the book launch was done through Canisius.
She's adorable. She's like this tiny.
The more you know. You can also donate. This is a copy of what Keno Border Initiative needs. So essentially they need everything for everyone. You can do this by either mailing it to Keno on the Arizona side. They have their address linked on to the Keno Border Initiative website. You can go to kenoborderinitiative.give. And they also have an Amazon wish list as well, so you can order specific items that they need and they will be sent without the hassle of packing and shipping things too. Also, you can donate your old cell phone because there is now the CBP One app, which allows migrants to apply for asylum via the internet, but a lot of migrants either get their phones stolen or they lose them through their travels, or they don't even have connection to Wi-Fi or the internet. Obviously, Keno has been helping them with this because Keno has Wi-Fi and is providing them with the resources to know how to properly apply for asylum and who can apply for asylum through the app. But this is an interesting donation you can make and a very impactful one because it could determine whether or not somebody crosses the border.
And we wanted to open the floor. Thanks so much for your attention. And do you have any questions? Thank you. Michael, sorry. Yes, sir, in the audience.
You guys were there for 30 days. It's incredible. What was one thing you wish you brought with you?
A fan. It was so hot. It was so hot.
Emma, you took mine.
Our friend slept on the roof one day. It was that hot in our house.
Our friend did sleep. Camilla, who was like, we called her party girl Camilla because she made very interesting decisions. She was from Lithuania, and one day she brought her mattress up to the roof and then slept on it and then decided to leave it there overnight in the one single rainstorm that we got while there. So that was a really interesting decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty gross.
What do you wish you brought?
I mean, my mom sent a few care packages. It was quite interesting. They actually got stopped at the border, and it was just candy. So I love candy, so I guess it was just like a sense of home. It's something silly and small, but I mean, I wish I would have brought them and not had to wait 3 or 4. I mean, that's a privilege in itself. Like, again, very privileged. But yeah, so I guess.
It took me 4 days to get my Airhead
And
straws.
I did share with everybody in the house. We got family size, and it was a thing. And I left everything there, so it wasn't just for me.
What about you, Emma?
I'm not exactly sure. Probably more fans maybe because it was very hot.
So hot.
No
AC anywhere. Just not.
Yeah, I didn't.
I think
Maybe-
a good one.
What?
Maybe gloves. Because in the car it would be so hot that the steering wheel would burn our hands, so we would like use masks to
Yeah.
drive. So maybe gloves would have been a good idea.
I don't know. I was probably going to say more money because I didn't take out that much money to bring, but that's just a practical thing. So. Yeah. Any other questions?
What would you tell students at Canisius about this experience?
Do it.
To do it, to not do it?
Yeah, I know we made it sound really scary, but like I would go back tomorrow and I wish I could have been there longer and I wish I could have done more. But sincerely, like not only did I get the chance to learn more and participate in this, I mean, it's really easy. We hang out in Buffalo. It's not really something that we think about. We're about as far from the Mexico-United States border as we can be. So it was really interesting in the first place to like be away from home and to get to see a new country and experience a different language. But it was also just like very humbling, and I feel like it gave me the opportunity to, first of all, use my knowledge, and second of all, humble myself and really open myself to every day being full of new experiences and learning new things. I've definitely been changed forever as a person because of it, and I tell everybody about how like important it was to me. So if you're considering it, I definitely recommend it. Or recommend doing the 6-day, I think it's June 3rd to June 9th. You can walk in the hot Arivaca Desert. But it's going to be great, and it's definitely, you learn a lot, so I really do credit it with a lot of kind of like my perspective shifting into what it is now.
I would definitely say do it, mainly because you gain this tight-knit, close community, and you are able to go back and have support like anytime. Like for instance, there were a few volunteers that either stayed there for like a million years, or they'd like continually come back because they would have a place to stay and they would have a community there. And I would honestly go back and volunteer. And because it was such a rewarding experience, and because of all the connections you make.
I think I would tell any Canisius student that's thinking about doing it just to prepare yourself emotionally, because it's not fun. I feel like I went into this experience thinking, I don't know, we joked about going to the beach a lot and like experiencing Mexico and just kind of.
The beach was so far though.
Yeah, the beach was like 4 hours in a car, and our car would not have made it, but we never went. But yeah, I feel like emotionally preparing yourself, like beyond Richard's classes, he gives great insight into the realities of the border. We watched dozens of movies on what happens and everything, but I feel like maybe reading the Voices of the Border would be very important, or just more hearing testimonies that are directly from migrants, because I didn't expect to hear what I heard and see what I saw. Like one day I remember there was like a gang outside of Kino, and someone had been sliced from their neck to their hip, and
You're nothing, like that's a thing that happened.
it was very like
It did
traumatizing
happen.
to see. And I remember I was just going from Roperia downstairs it was my second last day at Kino, and I walked down to go like put my apron away and just like get ready for the day, and Kino went into a complete lockdown, and there was just a man standing in front of me gushing blood, and our doctor we have like medical staff too, I don't know if we mentioned that, but there was a facility. Our doctor unfortunately didn't continue past week 1 that we were there.
Yeah.
But it was such an experience.
Bob was very helpful.
But yeah, I think like preparing yourself emotionally for seeing things like that is super important, because that can be traumatic and just, leave an impact on what really happens at the border. So
And prepare your Spanish.
yeah, prepare your Spanish too.
Because there's a lot of different
You
accents
learn-
too.
yeah.
There's
There
so
was
many accents.
Yeah, and
lots of
speaking-
native Guatemalan languages too.
Yeah,
So.
and speaking with children was super difficult too, because it's like baby babble, and I can't understand that in English, let alone in Spanish. So it was I relied on Emma a lot. She can very much understand the kids in Spanish. So I'd be like, what are they saying? Help me. So it was a lot of that. But yeah, definitely preparing Spanish and just like taking like the Spanish classes seriously before you go to better prepare yourself.
We did learn a lot of like Kino specific vocab while we were there.
Yeah, for
so.
sure.
Did you feel safe?
Yeah. Oh my God. I felt safe. Did you feel safe? You didn't feel safe? I felt safe.
I think we all have different levels. We talked about that, like different levels of security. Like a lot of people went on walks and bike rides alone. If I was home, I never left. I don't know. I just don't feel comfortable walking around here alone sometimes, let alone in Mexico. So I don't know. Did you guys go on walks?
I walked on my first day.
Yeah,
I did not go on a walk.
I didn't go on a walk. I very much was.
But we were always together,
Yeah.
so it felt safe in that sense, especially because we had seasoned volunteers with us who had been living there for months, so they told us, like, don't go to these parts, stay together.
Yeah, so I guess unsafe isn't the word. Maybe just like in a group, it's far more enjoyable and just, it's just different. Once you're there for 2 weeks, you kind of like understand what is dangerous and what's not and what's just normal. So, yeah.
The whole time I was there, I went from the Kino house to Kino to Walmart. That was like the whole, that was like the triangle that I made. So.
And miss.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was one Walmart, and we had
There's
the
a good
privilege of
Walmart.
going a few times. So
Yeah, there was a Walmart in Mexico.
it was very different than the United States, though. It was quite
Sometimes
small.
people will cross over just to go to the Walmart, but no
Yeah.
Wegmans, unfortunately. Yeah.
It was definitely better than the U.S. Walmart. But
Yeah.
well, the
They
one
had
that-
really
the one
good
that we went
produce
to.
there. Their produce was like super cheap because like half of it is like.
Yeah, another thing too is like, it's also very cheap to go on this experience. So if you're not trying to spend money for study abroad, you can get the credit. I spent $73 in 3 weeks. That's it. So
Yeah, it's
that
not
was
Spain,
everything.
it's not Italy, so.
Yeah, it's definitely very cheap.
Your food and housing is basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everything's paid for. So
Yeah, because most of the ingredients that we get to prepare our meals from is from Kino, and anything we don't have from there, we get from Walmart, like ice cream.
yeah,
Um,
and Kino provides us with a budget every month. I think it was like 200.
Oh, that's a new thing though. Well, that was a new thing when we were there.
Yeah,
They
so they
began
gave us
providing
money.
us money for that. So yeah.
No, it was you. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question, another question? On the map, which we used for the flyer for the event, that was from the Border Tales book,
Yeah.
Border Stories book. But it does show the detention centers on the American side. So was there much interaction between Kino, let's say, and the detention centers? Because I would like to say that this dinner, this event next Friday, is really justice for migrant families, people that work with the detention centers here. And so, you know, the people that enjoyed hearing your experience might be interested in meeting some of the people that help detainees when they're released without being told what they can do. They're released, but they're not helped, and they need helpers. So that's what this party next Friday down at Fitz Books.
Yeah, I would say that our experience is kind of unique in that COVID changed a lot of that. They were not really keeping people in long-term detention centers. That is how I got a lot of my exposure before going to Keno while I was still in Buffalo. Richard was telling me, like, all I knew about this experience really before going into it. One of the main things was that it was really close to the detention center and that people would be coming across the border and they would all be wearing the same outfit because that's what was given. Because of the way that COVID is and the way that they've been processing it, I know that they do still take people's belongings and then they would cross the border. I know the one gentleman who I was talking to, he had his certificate of like his citizenship and his birth certificate from Guerrero, and he had been trying to cross the border and it had been confiscated from him, and Border Patrol told him, if you want your stuff back, you need to call us and set up a date and time to pick it up within the next 30 days. Well, wouldn't you know that because of COVID and because of the backups and because of everything, they weren't able to even get like a phone call in, and all of their documentation was destroyed, like that proved that they were from where they were from, which obviously complicates every other process after that. He was not able to stay in Sonora or in Nogales. He had to go all the way back to Guerrero and basically like talk to somebody there and try to prove that he was like a citizen there, and that was like a really complicated process. So it's kind of like uniquely difficult for them now, or at least when we were there in May and June. But I wouldn't say that we had a ton of people who were from the detention center. We did have huge groups of like people dressed in the classic camouflage gear that they tell you about, that like people walk through the desert in. So there would be like huge groups of like 12, 15 men who would come in all wearing the same clothes, and they had been like captured while trying to cross and they had been sent back.
Sand in their boots.
I do remember one experience I had with, there was like probably 20 or 30 detainees that were deported back to Mexico after they were released. And I talked to this one man, and well, maybe he was like 22. And I spoke to him in Spanish initially because I thought he only spoke Spanish. And then he just responded in English because it was pretty obvious that I wasn't a native speaker. So he was like telling me about his experience, and he said that he actually crossed with his parents when he was 3, and he had lived in the United States his entire life, and he got involved in gang violence and ended up going to jail. So he got deported because he was undocumented, and this was his actual first experience that he could remember in Mexico. And I remember telling him, I was like, I can't imagine what you're doing. He was like, I went to school in Vegas, I used to party, I used to have fun, and now I'm here. And he's like, I don't know anybody here, I have no friends here, I have no family here. He's like, one of my family's in Guadalajara, or I forget which part of Mexico he was going to, but he was like, I'm gonna take a train tonight, and he had a phone and headphones, and he had a gray jumpsuit on. He was like, this is all I have. And it was just kind of like, oh, these people aren't criminals. These people aren't, I mean, on paper they are, but they're humans, and they're people who grew up just like us. And it was kind of insane to see that you can just literally just jump over, and here he is with no help, no family, no nothing, just from ending up in the facility. So it was unfortunate.
And I would just point out that all 3 of them, before they did this experience, also did a service learning with Justice for Migrant.
You did?
Yeah.
It was very helpful.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? If you have any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.